Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Going to give it one more minute before we begin as people are trickling in. Alrighty, I think we can get started. So thank you all for joining us today. Welcome to our fall series of the Mid-Career Conversations. Today's session is titled The Golden Handcuffs, Happiness versus the 9 to 5, featuring storyteller Samir Mourani. My name is Leanne Kazanchi, and I will be hosting today's conversation. And now, as this event is virtual, and since we are not all gathered in the same space, I recognize the following land acknowledgement might not necessarily be for the territory that you are currently on. If this is the case, please take the responsibility to acknowledge the traditional territory you are on and the current treaty holders. The website native-land.ca is a good resource for this. As a member of the York University community, I recognize many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaranto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. The Mid-Career Conversation series was created with alumni like you and myself in mind to connect, hear stories and experiences of other alumni, ask questions, and share your own unique journey and ambition. Today will be a special opportunity for us to come together as York alumni to share our stories and experiences. But first, just a little bit about myself as your host. I am also a fellow York U alumna. I completed my BA in 2015 in communications, and since then have completed a PR postgrad, a master's in digital marketing, and an MBA. I'm currently on the public affairs team at TD Bank and have been here for just about 7 years. Prior to that, I spent some time in government, a tech company, and ghostwriting for a member of parliament. And I'm really looking forward to being your host for the series. We'd also really love to know a bit more about you, so feel free to use the chat feature and share where you are tuning in from. For today's conversation, our storyteller will deliver a 20-minute talk, and then afterwards, we will take questions from you that you have for our storyteller, Samir. As always, we ask that your comments be relevant and respectful. After the Q&A, we'll stop recording and move into breakout rooms for just about 10 minutes for the networking portion of the event. And then after that, we will return to this main room to wrap things up. I encourage you to have your video on so that we can see each other and for our storyteller, Samir, to see you, but again, entirely optional. And as per Zoom meeting etiquette, we ask that you stay on mute until the Q&A. And if you have not done so, please go ahead and click the mute button now. And with that, very excited to welcome our storyteller for today, Samir Mourani. Samir is a York alumnus, entrepreneur, host, and producer of the internationally acclaimed Gent's Talk podcast. Samir is also the editor of Gent's Post, a premier men's lifestyle publication, and is a mental wellness speaker and advocate. Welcome, Samir. Great to have you.
Thanks, Leanne.
I'll turn things over to you so you can share your story.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that introduction. Just a quick nod, making sure everyone can hear me from the folks on the video. Okay, perfect. Hi, everybody. So I'd like to thank you very much for joining this session here and taking the time out of what I'm sure is a very, very busy day for you. And as mentioned, my name is Samir Mourani. I host a podcast. I'm an editor of a men's lifestyle publication, and I'll get into a little bit about that a little later on. But not that long ago, I was sitting in a cubicle in Midtown Toronto thinking about how I have this fulfilling career that checked off all of the boxes. I had great pay, amazing benefits, a pension, which is really hard to come by these days, and I had career progression. I mean it when I say it checked off all the boxes, right up until the moment where it didn't anymore. And then I found myself in this sort of existential crisis, if you will. Now, some of that had to do with the pandemic forcing me to work at home in the same room in which I slept in. And in that seclusion and isolation, amidst the chaos surrounding what seemed like a drastically uncertain future, I started to wonder what I was doing anymore. That fire stopped burning inside me, and I just wanted to leave. I had lost that spark, the one that makes you get out of bed early and ready to go conquer the world. But you see, the challenge for me was in something I like to call the golden handcuffs. Now, before I go further on that point, I want to make sure we get something clear right from the get go. I'm going to talk to you about finding happiness, and for some, that still means the 9 to 5, but perhaps it just means a different 9 to 5. And for others, that could mean taking a chance on something you've always dreamt of doing, taking a risk. But don't be fooled. What you see online, what you see on shows like Dragon's Den, are success stories. They're Hollywood stories, the kinds that will give you that extra boost of motivation and confidence to make you think, if they can, why can't I? And it's important to understand that the success stories, they mask hundreds and thousands, and who knows, maybe millions of failed attempts. And it's important that no matter what you do, you are always 100% brutally honest with yourself. And that's the first lesson I hope you take away from this talk. Now, I want to ask you a couple of questions here, and I want you to let that linger as we go through this conversation. Given this title and the fact that you've tuned in tells me that perhaps you're indeed interested in having a fulfilling career, and perhaps you're not where you want to be, or perhaps you're looking for some sort of change, or you are content with your current job, but there's a curiosity burning inside you for something else, maybe something more. Now, when I was asked to come here and speak to you all about my journey, and hopefully I'll be able to provide you some of that insight, and from there you may find something in your own journey, something to take away and reflect on. But my journey starts from as long back as I can remember. Everything I did was in service of the career job. As early as elementary school, teachers, parents, counselors, they bombard you with the "what do you want to do when you grow up" question. Where do you see yourself in 5, 10, 15 years? Pick your area of studies at the age of 15, and by 17, you should be ready to make a huge financial commitment. And more importantly, a time commitment to a university, a college, a path. And what you decide then will shape the rest of your life, but no pressure. And not to mention, if you pick a designation that requires a master's degree, a PhD, or some other additional training or accreditation, that's extra time and financial commitment. The list goes on and on and on. It's a lot of pressure. And most people I speak to on this subject tell me that they look to their parents or their family members as a source of inspiration for their career choice. But when you spend time with them, learning about their personality, what makes them happy, what brings them joy, what are they curious about, you learn that this does not often match what they're doing Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. And that's only if your job is Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. Some of us are not that lucky. Some of us work overtime, some work night shifts, others work on weekends. And the really lucky ones, and I know there's a few of you already here, they have a little handheld device that reminds them during their off hours of all the things they need to do the next day. So for me, it started way back when I was sitting in my counselor's office in high school. I had just quit my 4th internship placement in my senior year when I should already know what I want to do with the rest of my life. But you see, it didn't come as easily to me as it did to others, this career concept. I wanted to do so many things that I didn't know what to do. I was paralyzed by indecision. I wanted to be an athlete. I wanted to build houses and businesses and all sorts of things. I wanted to work in aerospace tech. Whatever you can think of, I probably wanted to do it. But as my counselor was railing off a series of these jobs, behind him on the wall was a poster to the International Academy of Design and Technology. It turns out that the school was teaming with the Toronto Film School to offer an acting program. And so I thought, I don't know what I want to do with my life, but why don't I pursue a stable career as an actor? Because that'll probably work for me. But it didn't take long before that dream ended very quickly. You see, there's not a lot of work for a new actor in Toronto, and the starving artist route just wasn't for me. But there was a lesson in there. You only get out what you put into it. So, being desperate for a job, I came across a financial firm that offered me the path to success in the form of selling life insurance. Be my own boss was the mantra, and fire your boss was the slogan. And suddenly I had visions for a bright, money filled future. But against the backdrop of the 2008 financial crisis, nobody wanted to listen to a young, hotshot finance guy pushing life insurance, and it humbled me very, very quickly. That was lesson number 3. Sometimes you can do all the right things and still end up with an unfavorable outcome because there is so much you cannot control. But in that brief window of time, I got a taste for entrepreneurship. And so I didn't want to go back to the 9 to 5. Instead, I went for easy money. And easy usually means quick. And oftentimes, it's not always the right way of doing things, let's say. So, an associate I had met at that same financial firm sold me on this idea of loan sharking. It sounded very easy. You lend some money, you make some interest, effectively, you become the bank. And what could go wrong? I was young, I was desperate, and I was naive. And I didn't understand my risks. See, it turns out that this associate was deeply embedded with both the Greek and Italian mobs. And that's right, they exist in Toronto. See, my money, my associate's money, and the mob's money was all connected. So when there were payment problems, who do you think was getting phone calls at 3 in the morning? Lesson number 4. If it's quick and easy, chances are the risks are too high, not worth it. So I had a choice. Either I quit, give up, try something else. I had to decide. Now remember, up until this point, the only post-secondary education I had was a certificate from the Toronto Film School. So with all due respect, a film actor certificate is not going to show up quite nicely on a resume. I was not the ideal candidate for jobs. So I picked up a retail job as a sales associate. Now, a handful of years earlier, my cousins, being from Lebanon, came to Canada fleeing a war. And that was the first time I was exposed to the politics of the region and had been doing some light reading. And in that moment, I came across the Global Political Studies program with a specialized honors in international relations at York University. And I thought, all right, I think I figured it out. I read the program description and I was hooked. I applied, was accepted, started a new journey. I'm going to be a diplomat, I decided. Now, I didn't qualify for any student loans because I was employed full-time up to that point and had just moved from working in retail to working at TD Bank. So I decided I'm going to dedicate every spare moment I had to working so I can pay my tuition fees. I didn't party, I didn't travel, I worked and went to class. I built good habits and stayed disciplined. And I finished a 4-year intensive program in 3.5 years. Now, while at York, I also became a student leader on one of the largest student organizations on the campus. And I founded a nonprofit charity that partnered with Doctors Without Borders and the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. We ended up raising over $60,000 and sending containers of clothing. And we raised all sorts of money and awareness for refugees, migrants, and asylum seekers. And in that, I found a sense of purpose. Now, in my final year, I applied for a government desk job, thinking I could work my way up into a foreign embassy, a consulate, a think tank. It's a perfect place to be if you want to be in politics without being a politician. I had these grand visions of being a diplomat one day, solving the crises across the Middle East. That was my calling. But instead, I found myself working as a program officer in an old rusty building full of ugly walls and ancient computers, making $44,000 a year. My very first day at work, and I'll never forget this, my desk neighbor decided to take an afternoon nap. And when my manager walked over to ask him something, it wasn't the reaction you think you're going to get. Rather than waking him up, she paused, looked startled, looked at me, and said, "I'll just come back a little later." And I was just, I didn't know what to do. I ran to the bathroom and I threw cold water on my face as I felt a dreaded reality setting in that this was going to be my life for the next 35 years. I decided right then and there I could quit, but instead, why don't I try to work as hard as I could, give this a shot, in the hopes that maybe one day someone would notice me and I'd work my way up and get out of this office into some place more fitting of my interests. I did work my way up in that office, and suddenly my perspective started to change. With a few promotions and some nice raises, I was suddenly in a financial position I had never been in before. I finally cracked the six-figure income barrier. I bought a condo, I got married, I traveled to some of the most beautiful places in the world. My benefits took care of me, my evenings and weekends were mine and nobody bothered me, and before I knew it, almost 8 years had flown by. And I thought, this is it. I'm finally content. Next up was a family, and afterwards, retirement, followed by more and more travel. And so I got really comfortable. But something inside me was rotting and I could feel it. I dismissed it though, because on the surface, I had the perfect career. How could I complain? Even if I entertained the idea of going somewhere else, I looked at the benefits, the pay, the stability, and thought, even if I really wanted to leave, I'd be stupid to leave. So I was handcuffed. Except these handcuffs were golden. 2020 changed everything for a lot of people. And in March of 2020, my partner and I split up. And about 2 weeks later, the pandemic was official and lockdowns took effect. My entire world changed in 10 days. So here I was sitting in a 700 square foot condo. I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't distract myself with travel. I couldn't go out and see friends. I had to face my demons. And I realized I was deeply unhappy. And I know many of us felt the same way. I was unhappy because I felt unfulfilled. And when the pandemic stripped away my everything, my job was the only thing I could do. And I began to really understand how empty it made me feel. I made money and had nowhere to spend it. I could travel for weeks, but couldn't go anywhere. The distractions were truly gone. There's a piece I read recently by the incredible Matthew Perry, who I'm sure everyone here now knows recently passed away. And in his book, he talks about how badly he wanted the fame and the money, and only after getting it, the thing he really wanted, did he realize it didn't make him happy. And those words could not ring more true for me in that moment. And in my journey of self-discovery, I turned to social media. I put out posts, connected with new people, because really and truly, social media was the only way you can connect with anybody at that time. One person I reconnected with was an associate I met nearly 10 years earlier at the same financial firm I was selling insurance in. And no, it was not the person I got into business with that turned out connected to the mob, thankfully. But after a brief conversation, he said, "Let me introduce you to someone." From there, he introduced me to a gentleman, and we talked for hours about men's mental health, relationships, confidence, and the overall lack of support for men in this area. The outcome of that conversation was him asking if I wanted to help him build a platform for men's mental health and lifestyle. The platform was to be called Gent's Post, short form for gentlemen. After agreeing to take on this side hobby, and it really was a hobby, because this was never something I ever thought about doing, I began to be exposed to different opportunities to meet and write stories about celebrities and inspiring people dealing with their own mental health challenges. Some 15 months later, an opportunity arose to interview the great comedian Russell Peters. And I put together a studio, we recorded the interview, and in that conversation, we caught lightning in a bottle. And this video that you're about to see was that exact moment.
Kid. And I was like, well, how do I fix that? So I had all these extra things laying around, and I'm like, none of this matters. You know, at the end of the day, you know, you got kids. That's all that matters at this point. And so I started realizing, well, this doesn't matter. I don't need it. And all I was doing was collecting all these things. In all fairness, if you want to really boil it down to the truth, the only reason you guys are doing all these things is to attract women. And if you're going to do all these big, flossy, flashy things, you're going to attract the wrong women. And I did that. So.
Lesson learned.
Lesson learned. It took me a long time to figure this lesson out.
Thank you. Russell was our very first guest on the podcast. And you see, in that moment, a generational comedian known for influencing so many and making many more laugh shared a valuable truth about himself. That he was alone, he was depressed, and he was going through something. And when you see a celebrity talk like that, a person you typically associate with having everything in the world and that they shouldn't have anything to complain about, it kind of makes you realize that they're just like us and we're just like them. And at the end of the day, we all feel the same thing. And that was the exact moment the Gents Talk podcast was born. And since then, I've dedicated countless hours towards building a platform to support conversations around mental health, confidence, and emotional intelligence. I've spoken to health experts, entrepreneurs, award-winning musicians, athletes, actors, you name it. I finally found my real purpose, something that keeps me fulfilled. And I stumbled into all of it because I followed my curiosity. The series is now featured in the top 15% globally on Spotify. The series resonated so well with people that Air Canada called and asked, how can we get this on board our planes? I thought it was a scam, but luckily the executive turned out to be super nice, and now the series is on all 450 of their planes, and they fly 52 million people a year. You see, I never had a passion for podcasting or hosting or talking to strangers. In fact, my social battery is always running low. But I had a curiosity. I was curious about understanding how to become the best version of myself. That was my curiosity, and I followed that curiosity, as I had my entire life without realizing I was doing that. I followed it from one thing to the next. If you asked me at any point in that journey what my passion was, I could never tell you. So here's a recap. Lesson number 1, make sure you're always honest with yourself. Acting taught me my second lesson. You only get what you put into something. It taught me tenacity. The financial crisis gave me lesson 3. There are factors outside your control, and you need to be prepared to go with life's punches. Lesson 4 was simple. Don't get distracted by shiny things. Quick and easy are never truly easy. It taught me to create boundaries for myself, identify what level of risk I'm comfortable taking, and know when to pull away. Gamblers will struggle with that very concept, which is why even after they win a few hands at the blackjack table, they'll quickly lose it and then some. Going back to school taught me how to build good habits and discipline. And so here's my final piece of advice to all of you. And thank you so much for listening to me to this point. Your passion, even if you're lucky enough to find it, can fizzle. Your passion can even betray you. Most people can't even tell you what they're passionate about, even the successful ones. Instead, follow your curiosity, because I promise you, you'll be wonderfully surprised at what you might discover on the other side of that. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Samir, for sharing this incredible journey that had many unexpected turns along the way. I'm sure I can tell from the chat that there are a lot of people that feel the exact same way that I feel. And you know, the nuggets of wisdom that you shared with us, I feel like it can be applied to various experiences, whether they're similar to yours or drastically different. So I know that I can tell in the chat there are a bunch of people who want to ask some questions. So before I open it up to everyone to submit their questions using the Q&A function, I have a couple of my own. You mentioned how, you know, you've interviewed, you know, a lot of prominent people on your podcast, starting with Russell Peters and many influential people since then. I think something that, you know, many of us might struggle with is, you know, we make that connection, whether it's through experiences like yours or at networking events, and we have a good conversation and not sure where it goes after that. So is there a trick that you use for building lasting connections with the guests that you feature?
Yeah, I think people are thank you for the question. I think people trust your gut. Most times when you meet a new person, you can tell whether they're genuine about meeting you and interested in getting to know you, and when they just simply want to extract something from you, whether it's a relationship, a connection, whatever it is. One of the things I do, because I'm genuinely interested in the people I meet and connect with, but I have a terrible memory. So one of the things I do is I make little notes for myself after the conversation is ended. So if, for example, Leanne, you and I just met each other for the first time and you tell me that your birthday is on January 12th, I'll go in and I'll make a little note for myself. I'll create a little contact profile for you. I'll make a little note for myself that says your birthday is on January 12th. And then I'll make sure to send you, I'll even set a calendar reminder to go and send you a quick message to say happy birthday. The reason I do that is because I want you to understand that I value our relationship even enough to do something like that. And don't think the fact that you got to go and make a little note and all that stuff somehow takes away from the authenticity of it. You cared enough to go that extra mile and do that extra little bit of work. And so I think people appreciate when you follow up with them. I mean, when was the last time somebody reached out to you and said happy birthday? And, it's not like you hang out with them every Saturday night type of thing. It resonates. It means something to you. So that's something that I generally do with people I meet, especially when I want to build a long-term relationship with. The most successful entrepreneurs in the world, their relationships with the people who've helped them grow and the people that they've grown with, they've watered the plants of their relationship daily.
Yeah. Relationships are worth nurturing in order to last. That's great. One more question for you, Samir. Something I really enjoyed about your story is your vulnerability. You are very open and honest with your story, whether it's your professional side of it all or your personal side. And so I'm curious, when I think of vulnerability and honesty, I also think of comfort or discomfort. And so I'm curious about your thoughts about, getting comfortable in your career. How do you feel about that? A lot of people, kind of stay in the same role for a long time, or like you said, you started off in working in the cubicle and it wasn't exactly what you imagined. So in your opinion, why do you feel like it's a bad thing to get comfortable in your career?
So I spent nearly 8 years in that job, or in that space, let's call it. And I got very comfortable. And I saw myself staying there for the next 20 something years. And when you get comfortable, you get complacent. I really believe that. Because then we're naturally curious people, right? We're naturally inclined to want to do more, to learn more. And when you get comfortable, you just stop trying. If you get comfortable in a relationship with your partner, the first piece of feedback you'll likely get when things start to get tense is you don't try hard enough anymore, because you just assume that listen, I got it. I made it. Like in marriages, for example, I got to the altar. I'm done. I don't need to try and impress my partner anymore. Or at work, I got the promotion. I don't need to impress my boss anymore. I don't need to work harder. I got the salary. I got the benefits. I'm done. And when you do that, you end up stagnating. And worse, you end up going backwards. And something that every time I've ever gone from one thing to the next, it's always been uncomfortable. And we have a natural fear of that because there's an unknown variable in there. But when you sort of veer off into the unknown and you're in a place of uncomfortability, you'd be very surprised at what you're truly capable of that you've been either suppressing or disregarding about your capabilities for so long.
Yeah. No, it's you're making me think of that, that checklist that you're told, that mental checklist or like literal checklist that you're meant to follow in your life or in your career. And it's something that I think of that you just reminded me of is while you're checking those things off of your list, we need to be mindful that the list needs to keep growing and it doesn't kind of end after you've checked everything on that goal or vision board that you have. And so that's great advice. Thank you, Samir.
Thank you.
So I'm going to open it up to our audience to ask some questions. So please go ahead and submit your questions into the Q&A feature in Zoom. And we have a couple that have come in. I'm going to start with the first one that I see on here, which is Samir, who is your dream interviewee for your podcast?
So anybody who has Instagram, I encourage you to search me up right now. We're just going to do a really quick exercise. Search me up and look at my stories. So my hands are right here. I'm not doing anything. Go through my stories and then you'll see what I posted literally right before this conversation. So I'll give like 15 seconds and then I'll talk about it.
Where are we looking? Your stories?
My stories, yeah. So where you see my profile photo, for those who don't use Instagram very often, just click on that, click through a couple, and you'll see a little blurb, a photo of Robin Williams and a little blurb underneath. That is who I wish I could have interviewed, because that's the one. Thank you for finding it. That is who I wish I could have spent an hour speaking to, because firstly, there's a nostalgia effect there. I grew up watching a lot of Robin Williams films, and it just seemed like anytime I watched a film of his, he taught me something, whether it was Good Will Hunting or Patch Adams, whatever the films were. It's just I just always left feeling a lot of emotions and learning something. And I also really believe that comedians have this innate ability to be the truth tellers of our society. And so combine him being a comedian and him also just understanding how a person who can be so happy on the outside could have been so hurting on the inside, and understanding why it could drive a person to do what they do, I think only reaffirms the importance of the work that I'm trying to do today.
Yeah, Robin Williams. I think when he passed away, that really was like collective mourning across the world for sure.
Yeah.
Another question that Samir, just for context, there are a bunch of comments in the chat of people kind of really commending you in your career story. So for you who would like to share that with Samir, we will be breaking out into networking shortly, and please feel free to share that with him directly. One other question is that, many people are curious about the podcast, jumping back to that, and what actually goes on behind the scenes. So are you able to share with us how you go about finding those guests and what really goes into preparing for those really intimate conversations?
Yeah, so it's definitely not a one-person job. That's for sure. It's a team effort. With the Russell Peters interview, I got approached. So because I am the editor of a men's lifestyle publication, we often get a lot of public relations agencies and publicists reaching out saying, hey, so-and-so is going to be in Toronto. Would you be interested in, drafting a story on this person about X? And after I got off the phone with that agency, I called them right back 5 minutes later and said, hey, can we get this on video? And they're like, yeah, we don't see why not. And in that moment, I realized I don't have a videographer. I don't have a studio. I don't know how to film a podcast. I don't know the first thing about podcasts, but let's get out of our comfort zone and try something. And so I hired a videographer, found a studio. It's easier to do these things when you tell them Russell Peters is coming. And we filmed it. He was 2 hours late. I didn't know if he was going to show up. I had just put maybe $3,000 into the whole operation, and if it worked, great. We would find a sponsor to cover that, but if not, that's out of pocket. So that's really, again, taking a risk, and that's the lifestyle of an entrepreneur. He showed up and we filmed it, and ever since then, it just seemed to be, I think the messaging of that series just resonates so much with people that, similar to the Air Canada piece, just people start reaching out and they say, hey, I saw so-and-so who I know or who, I look up to, and I'd love to be a guest. And now we have people from all over the world reaching out like, hey, are you coming to Miami? Are you coming to the UK? We recently filmed a segment in Miami with a billionaire, a Brazilian national team soccer player, and there's talks to go back. And so that's, I guess, one part. It's a very long process, and I can get into it maybe in some other way. But on the other hand, the preparing for an episode, a lot of those kinds of podcasts, a lot of, television shows, they're very scripted. The one thing that I intentionally do is I don't script it. I don't write questions. I do very little research about the person, because I kind of want it to feel like you've stumbled into a conversation in a coffee shop and you just happen to overhear two people talking. And the reason I do that is because that's how you actually get a person across from you to feel comfortable, to feel safe, to have these conversations, because they're not easy conversations. And we've had scenarios where some of these guests will come in, they would leave saying this was therapeutic, and then, those negative self-talk comes back in and they don't want to share it. They don't want to tell anybody that they just had this really deep conversation, because they're afraid of what people will think about them. And that's okay too, because that's their journey and their process that they're working through. But I don't script it, and I very much just walk into it. And the first question I always ask is, what'd you do today? And then from there, it's let's just have an hour-long conversation. And what you see in the episodes is what you get. I don't cut anything out. And that's how we capture these real, raw, authentic moments.
So just super organic and
Mhm.
very conversational. It's great and rare, actually. I feel like a lot of things are scripted to the T nowadays.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have another question from Ravina, who asks, what message regarding men's mental health are you most passionate about getting across through your platform?
That's a great question. Thank you, Ravina, for asking that. I'm going to quote Chef Devin Rajukumar, because that was probably one of my favorite episodes. And I knew what I was doing, but when he said these words to me, that's when I really realized what we were doing. And he said that, he grew up with addiction. He grew up with, immigrant parents and the challenges of, them being first generation, him trying to figure life out. And he said to me, I didn't know that it was okay to not be okay. And it's sort of just like somebody threw cold water on my face, because then I realized, yeah, it is okay when you're not feeling okay, because we all feel it. Like no matter what macho man out there says to you, I don't cry, I'm strong-willed, I don't have bad days, is lying to you and himself. Truthfully, anybody for that matter who says that, they're lying to themselves, because we all go through bad days, and we all ultimately just want to be better versions of ourselves and be happier versions of ourselves. We've all made mistakes. We've all done things that if we look back and we go, oh man, I would not do that again. And again, it's okay, because that's part of the human experiment. That's part of the human growth, right? And I think the other thing that really resonated with me, if I may, is, and this is kind of to veer off the question a little, but just on the topic of something I really took away from the episodes, is our parents are going through life for the first time, just like we are. And that one also really resonated with me, because a lot of times I feel people will often unfairly lob their troubles on their parents and blame their parents without realizing that they're figuring it out just as much as you are. So
Oh, that's so true. Everyone's a human, and they're navigating their life in their own way, and for the first time, to your point.
man.
Samir, two more questions before we move into networking. In true York fashion, as York alumni, you and I, and everyone on the call, can you share your favorite memory during your time at York?
That's a good question. There's a lot of good memories there. I think my favorite memory was being able to go from one class to another. And if your class happened to be in different sides of the school, you really got a full spectrum of all the different students that were at that school, right? Because there was always so much happening at all times of day, right? You walk through Very Hall and there's 3-4 different tables, support this charity, come to this fundraiser, come to this social night, come to this cultural event. And then professors walking through, and you can hear them talking to each other and debating a topic. And then by the time you pass the library, there's another group of students doing some sort of tabling about something. You felt like York was almost its own little bubble, because there was so much happening. And you really almost didn't also need to feel like you need to turn on the news, because you got all the news you needed from within York's halls. So I think that was my favorite part of it. I actually found myself I remember my very first week at York, my first class was at 8:30 in the morning. My second class was at 8:30 or 7:30. So I had this like long gap in between. And I used to hate it. And I'd like go home and have to come back, and go home and have to come back. And after maybe the second or third week, I found myself just spending the day there, because I thought to myself, this is fun. I can actually learn so much in between classes as well. And so I think that's my favorite part of it, is that social element.
Totally. There's no shortage of things happening.
No.
Protests, to flash mobs, to
Everything.
Everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Last question. What is next for you in your journey?
Huh. I don't know. And that's okay.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of it, that I don't have a roadmap paved, right? I mean, that's how I stumble into all of this. And I think I've kind of just embraced that I don't know what's next. I mean, I know what I would like. I'd love to do, more of these talks and hopefully have more podcast episodes. And, we get messages all the times from people just like, hey, thanks for posting this. I really needed to hear this today. I needed to see this today. I mean, that kind of impact to me means a lot. I think we live in a world right now that's full of chaos, and I feel like we've lost our humanity. Part of me wants to go back to doing some sort of nonprofit work, to help those who can use a hand right now. But again, if I had to tell you right now, I don't know.
Yeah. Go with the flow, I guess,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You always need that very detailed 5 or 10-year plan. I'm sure you have
I
some.
promise you it'll change.
Why plan when you know it's going to change?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Samir. Those are all the questions we got, although I'm sure people will have some more in the networking portion. So in a few minutes, you will be prompted to join a breakout room with 2 to 3 other alumni. You'll find a few icebreaker questions in your room if you'd like to use them, and you'll have about 10 minutes to connect before you get invited back into the main room. See you soon.